Abby, you look at Vice President Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee. He's itching to have this fight on health care. So, Speaker Pelosi, let's dig a little bit deeper into this campaign issue in the latest polls because they do hover over everything. The president is looking at tough numbers. According to a New York Times Siena College poll, former Vice President Joe Biden is leading in 6 battleground states that President Trump won in 2016. Another Times Siena poll showed Biden ahead of the president by 14 points nationally and showed Trump losing ground with his base of white voters. The president's response has pretty much been going back to his 2016 playbook, from touting the border wall alongside Jonathan Lemire in Arizona this week to baselessly accusing former President Obama of treason. Abby, back to Biden. How does his campaign see all this, these polling numbers about the race? Are they looking at a landslide?
Well, you know, I don't think you could find a Democrat in the country that would sit here and look at polls in June and say this is going to be, it's going to be easy for the nominee come November. Democrats are so beyond nervous. The Biden campaign is no exception. But they do understand that the polls are showing something very real, which is that the president is not increasing his support at all. In fact, his support is dropping like a rock in response to dual crises, the coronavirus pandemic and his handling of racial tensions. It's why you've seen the president go back to his base message. It's why you see him and his campaign putting out new ads aimed at trying to depress support for Joe Biden, especially among black voters. Look, I mean, the Biden campaign is keenly aware this is not going to be easy. This is an incumbent president, but they also understand that President Trump, they believe, is his own worst enemy. Many of these wounds the president is experiencing are of his own making. So that's why you don't see Joe Biden trying to go out of his way to create moments that don't necessarily need to be there. They're giving their speeches, but they are avoiding press conferences. They are being very, very careful here because they understand that what's going on here is President Trump is himself creating a hole that might be very, very difficult for him to get it out of come November.
Jonathan, what is the White House's plan to respond to these polling numbers? I was reading the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and they took him on today saying, quote, as of now, Mr. Trump has no second-term agenda or even a message beyond 4 more years of himself. I know the president's not going to New Jersey this weekend. He may meet with aides to talk about his campaign. What's next for the Trump campaign?
I believe that same editorial said that if President Trump was looking for a nickname for Joe Biden, it shouldn't be Sleepy Joe, but right now it might be President-elect if things were to continue this way. My colleagues and I at the Associated Press addressed this topic today with our news story with the president's campaign sort of theory of the case. They recognize right now there aren't that many voters out there who are undecided about President Trump. There may not even be that many they can persuade and kind of win back. They believe, and we can take exceptions with it, but they believe about 40% of the country still likes the president. They think his approval number has been relatively stable throughout his 3.5 years. Their goal to turn out that 40% as high as possible, even though, and believe that the 60% that supports Joe Biden may not turn out as high because they think that the portion that supports the president, even though it's a smaller number, is more enthusiastic about it. They're diehards. They'll come out for him. Hence all the base plays this week about the border, about Confederate monuments, about Obamacare. The support for Joe Biden, though seems wider, seems a little more tepid. The enthusiasm numbers aren't quite as high. But what the campaign is now worried about, are they seeing some of those enthusiasm numbers for Joe Biden start to pick up amid the protests of the last weeks, amid further worries about the president's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which is why you're seeing the president's team try so desperately to drive Biden's negatives down. Part of why they won in 2016, of course, is because Hillary Clinton had such high negatives too, just like Trump did. Biden's aren't nearly as high,
right,
which is why the president and his team right now are trying to drag Biden down. They don't think they can bring up Trump's numbers all that much.
Dan, you study these polls. Anytime the Post has a story about a poll, you're usually on the front page writing about it. What are you learning when you study these latest numbers, when you see him having soft support with evangelicals, with white voters?
Bob, I think, as we know, you can't predict the outcome of this election at this moment. But if you look at these polls, the president is in a terrible position. I talked to 2 strategists over the last couple of days about these polls, one a Republican and one a Democrat. And both of them used the same expression, unprompted, which is Trump fatigue. One of them said to me, if you look at these poll numbers, his ballot number, the percentage of people who say they're ready to vote for him, is actually below his approval rating. And I said, well, you would assume in normal times the president will get at least his approval rating in terms of the vote in November. And this person said, I am not convinced of that. I think that there are a lot of voters who have just kind of had it with the Trump era. This was a Republican who said that to me, and a Democrat had a similar view. Now, you know, there will come a time over the summer when Vice President Biden will be, as the expression goes, in the barrel. He will face some adversity. You don't go through campaigns like this without having to do that. But right now, I think the Biden campaign feels that the attacks that the president has leveled against him and that the campaign is leveling against him are not having that much effect. And they look at the defection among groups that have supported not just President Trump, but other Republicans in the past. And they say that that puts Biden in a stronger position at this point than Hillary Clinton was 4 years ago. So I think that this is a long, slow road back for the president. This is not something that he can do by simply flipping a switch and that the electorate will begin to turn around. He's going to have to do something that is difficult for him, which is to have a consistent and disciplined message and campaign operation.
Kasie, I know Republicans are uneasy when they look at these numbers. I was talking to a Republican senator the other day, and I said, what's your strategy? And he said, avoid Kasie Hunt in the hallway so she doesn't ask me a tough question about President Trump. But Kasie, what about the Democrats? I mean, coming back to what we were talking about with Abby, they had big primaries this week. Elliot Engel could be on track to lose in a New York Democratic House primary, a committee chairman, Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, a tight Senate race on the Democratic side in Kentucky. In your notebook, what are the lessons learned from this week's primaries?
Bob, I think that the top line lesson here for any politician in power, and we saw the Republicans go through this a little bit more recently, and Democrats have been grappling with a different version of it in recent years, is that complacency is absolutely a killer if you are in power. And right now we are seeing, frankly, our government, and the blame for this is falling at President Trump's feet for obvious reasons, but also any elected official who is seen as disconnected from either their voters directly or from the times or from the issues that people care about right now is at risk. And for Democrats, you have seen more progressive candidates take strides here in these primary elections, and you've particularly seen some candidates who perhaps had establishment backing, were part of the establishment, who many thought would easily cruise to victory, and that assumption by itself has proven to be damaging in these times. And I think in particular, you've seen candidates of color in a couple of important instances really rise on the moment that we are experiencing as a nation. People are saying, yes, I want someone who is out in the streets, who is protesting with me, who understands the pain that I am feeling and is willing to demonstrate that. So I think that's really an important force, and anybody who is running for re-election at this point underestimates it at their own peril.
And that included the president's...
Bob,
Yes, do you want to jump in, Abby?
yeah, just quickly, I mean, I think that that's exactly right. And what we've also seen in this past week, fueled by these protests actually that have been out in the streets, is voter registration is up. People are voting in really high numbers, historic numbers for some of these primaries. That's a trend that I expect to see coming November. And it's one of the reasons that the president himself is extremely nervous. He thinks that all of these people voting by mail are a threat to him. Republicans I speak to say this is a battlefield that Republicans can be competitive in, but because the president is so opposed to vote by mail, they are putting themselves at a disadvantage. I think it's going to be a huge factor as we go forward. There is a lot of energy in the Democratic base that is being harnessed, not just by registration, but by people having more means to vote. And that's something that could benefit top and bottom of the ticket come November.